There are wounds we carry that no one sees, battles that don't leave bruises, yet shape the way we think, the way we trust, the way we live. Not every enemy stands in front of you. Some exist in silence, in hidden intentions, in whispers behind your back, and sometimes even within your own fears. When we speak of secret enemies, we are not only talking about people, but about unseen forces, resentment, betrayal, anxiety that quietly erode our sense of safety. Recognizing unseen threats and hidden intentions begins with a deeper awareness that not everything harmful announces itself openly. In life, we are often taught to be cautious of what is visible: clear opposition, spoken criticism, direct conflict. But what truly unsettles the human spirit is not always what is loud and obvious, it is what operates quietly beneath the surface. Psalm 64 draws attention to this subtle reality, describing enemies who sharpen their tongues like swords and aim bitter words in secret. This imagery is not only poetic, it reflects a psychological truth about how hidden hostility works. Unseen threats often manifest through small, almost imperceptible actions, tones that carry concealed resentment. Words that seem harmless but are layered with intention, behaviors that gradually erode trust. These are the kinds of dangers that slip past our defenses because they don't fit the traditional image of conflict. And because they are not always clear, they create confusion. You may begin to question your own perception, wondering if you are overthinking or imagining things, while something within you quietly senses that something is not right. To recognize these hidden dynamics, one must develop a relationship with their inner awareness. This means paying attention not only to what is said or done, but to how it feels. The body often perceives what the mind tries to rationalize away. A sense of unease, tension, or emotional exhaustion after certain interactions can be a signal that something deeper is at play. This is not about becoming suspicious of everyone, but about becoming honest with yourself. Awareness is not fear, it is clarity. Hidden intentions are often rooted in unresolved emotions: jealousy, insecurity, resentment that people may not even consciously acknowledge within themselves. Instead of expressing these feelings openly, they may act indirectly, using subtle forms of harm that allow them to avoid accountability. This is why recognizing unseen threats requires not just observation, but understanding. When you understand that hidden hostility often comes from internal struggles, you stop taking everything personally, yet you also stop ignoring the impact it has on you. There is also an internal dimension to this keynote. Not all secret enemies exist outside of you. Some live within self-doubt that whispers you are not enough, fear that convinces you to stay small, past wounds that distort how you interpret present situations. These internal voices can be just as destructive as any external force, if not more. Recognizing them requires the same level of awareness and honesty. You begin to notice patterns: how certain thoughts arise, how they influence your emotions, how they shape your actions. The process of recognition is not about becoming paranoid or defensive. It is about becoming grounded. When you are grounded, you no longer need everything to be visible in order to trust your understanding. You become less dependent on external validation and more connected to your internal compass. This allows you to respond rather than react, to observe without immediately judging, and to protect your peace without creating unnecessary conflict. In a world where not everything is as it seems, the ability to recognize unseen threats becomes a form of quiet strength. It is not loud, it is not aggressive, but it is deeply transformative. It shifts you from being unaware and vulnerable to being conscious and discerning. And in that awareness, you begin to see more clearly not only others, but yourself. The emotional impact of silent betrayal is often deeper and more disorienting than open conflict because it leaves you without clear evidence, yet full of undeniable feeling. When someone opposes you openly, there is at least a sense of clarity. You know where you stand, you understand the dynamic, and you can respond accordingly. But silent betrayal operates differently. It hides behind appearances, disguises itself as neutrality or even kindness, while quietly undermining trust. In Psalm 64, the description of enemies who act in secrecy reflects this exact kind of experience: harm that is not immediately visible, yet profoundly felt. One of the most difficult aspects of silent betrayal is the confusion it creates. You may sense that something is wrong, but you cannot easily point to a specific moment or action. This ambiguity can lead to self-doubt. You begin to question your instincts, wondering if you are misreading the situation or being overly sensitive. The mind searches for certainty, but silent betrayal rarely provides it. Instead, it leaves you in a state of emotional tension, where your inner truth conflicts with the lack of external proof. This kind of betrayal also affects your sense of safety. Human relationships are built on trust, the belief that the people around you are not intentionally working against you. When that trust is quietly broken, it disrupts more than just one connection, it shakes your overall perception of relationships. You may become more guarded, less open, and more hesitant to rely on others. Not because you want to distance yourself, but because something within you is trying to protect you from being hurt again in a way that felt invisible and therefore uncontrollable. Emotionally, silent betrayal often leads to a lingering heaviness. It is not always intense or dramatic, but it is persistent. You may feel drained after certain interactions without fully understanding why. It can be a sense of sadness that is difficult to explain, or a subtle anxiety that arises in situations where you once felt comfortable. These emotional responses are not random, they are your inner system reacting to a perceived lack of safety, even if your conscious mind has not fully processed it. Another layer of this experience is the sense of isolation it can create. Because silent betrayal is not obvious, it can be difficult to talk about. If you try to explain it to others, it may sound vague or unconvincing, which can make you feel even more alone. This isolation can deepen the emotional impact, as you are left to process something significant without the validation or understanding that usually helps people heal. At the same time, it is important to recognize that the pain of silent betrayal is not a sign of weakness, it is a reflection of your capacity to trust and connect. The very thing that makes you vulnerable to this kind of hurt is also what allows you to form meaningful relationships. The goal is not to shut down that capacity, but to become more aware of where and how you invest it. Understanding the emotional impact of silent betrayal also involves acknowledging that healing does not come from forcing clarity or confronting every uncertainty. Sometimes there will be no clear answers, no direct admissions, no obvious resolution. What matters is how you respond to what you feel. By honoring your emotional experience rather than dismissing it, you begin to rebuild your sense of trust, not necessarily in others, but in yourself. Over time, this self-trust becomes a foundation. It allows you to navigate relationships with greater awareness, to recognize patterns more quickly, and to protect your emotional well-being without becoming closed off. The pain of silent betrayal may not disappear instantly, but it can transform into insight, guiding you toward healthier boundaries and deeper understanding. Awareness as the first step to protection begins with a simple but often overlooked truth. You cannot protect yourself from what you refuse to see. Many people move through life relying on assumptions, believing that if something isn't obvious, it isn't there. But real-life challenges, especially those described in Psalm 64, often exist beneath the surface. Protection, therefore, is not just about reacting to danger, it is about cultivating the ability to notice it before it fully unfolds. Awareness is not the same as suspicion. It is not about constantly expecting harm or distrusting everyone around you. Instead, it is a grounded state of attentiveness, where you are present enough to observe patterns, shifts in behavior, and subtle inconsistencies. It is the difference between living on autopilot and living with intention. When you are unaware, you tend to overlook small signs that something may be off. But when awareness is present, those same signs become information rather than confusion. The first layer of awareness is internal. You can accurately read external situations. You must become familiar with your own emotional landscape. This means recognizing how you typically feel when you are safe, respected, and at ease. Once you understand your baseline, it becomes easier to notice when something disrupts it. A sudden sense of discomfort, tension, or unease is not something to dismiss it as data. It does not always mean there is a threat, but it is an invitation to pay closer attention. Many people ignore these internal signals because they have been conditioned to prioritize logic over feeling or to avoid discomfort altogether. But awareness requires you to sit with what you feel without immediately trying to explain it away. When you dismiss your instincts repeatedly, you weaken your ability to recognize patterns over time. On the other hand, when you listen even without fully understanding, you strengthen your connection to your inner guidance. The second layer of awareness is external. This involves observing the environment and the people around you with clarity rather than assumption. Hidden intentions often reveal themselves not through one dramatic action, but through consistent patterns. A person who repeatedly speaks negatively about others in private, who shifts their behavior depending on who is present, or who creates subtle divisions between people may not openly declare harmful intent, but their actions tell a story. Awareness allows you to notice these patterns without rushing to judgment, giving you space to understand what is actually happening. Protection begins the moment awareness is established because it changes how you respond. Without awareness, reactions are often impulsive. You may overtrust, overlook, or engage in ways that leave you vulnerable. With awareness, your responses become more intentional. You may choose to create distance, set boundaries, or simply observe without immediately involving yourself. Protection in this sense is not always about confrontation, it is often about discernment. There is also a spiritual dimension to awareness. In many ways, awareness is an act of alignment, being present enough to see truth as it is, rather than as you wish it to be. Psalm 64 emphasizes the reality that not all harm is visible, but it also points toward a deeper assurance that what is hidden does not remain hidden forever. Awareness allows you to live in that space between uncertainty and trust, where you remain attentive without becoming overwhelmed. As awareness deepens, it becomes less of an effort and more of a natural state. You begin to notice without forcing, to understand without overanalyzing, and to respond without reacting impulsively. This is where protection becomes quiet and steady, not driven by fear, but guided by clarity. Instead of trying to control every situation, you learn to navigate them with a sense of grounded confidence, knowing that you are no longer blind to what once went unnoticed, trusting divine. Justice over personal revenge requires a shift that is both emotional and deeply internal. When someone harms you, especially in hidden or indirect ways, the instinct to respond, to defend, or even to retaliate can feel immediate and justified. There is a natural human desire to restore balance, to make things right, to ensure that what was done does not go unanswered. But the challenge lies in how that balance is pursued. Psalm 64 presents a perspective that moves beyond human reaction and into a deeper trust that justice does not depend solely on your actions, but on a higher order that sees what you cannot always prove. Personal revenge often begins as a response to pain, but it rarely ends there. It has a way of extending the very harm it seeks to correct. When you hold on to the need to retaliate, your focus remains tied to the person or situation that caused the hurt. Your thoughts circle around what happened, what should have happened, and what you wish to do in response. Over time, this focus can consume emotional energy, keeping you connected to the experience long after it has passed. Instead of freeing you, revenge can quietly bind you to the very thing you are trying to escape. Trusting divine justice does not mean denying what happened or pretending that it did not matter. It means acknowledging the reality of the harm while choosing not to take on the role of judge, jury, and enforcer. This is not about weakness or passivity, it is about recognizing the limits of human perspective. You may see part of the situation, but you do not see everything. Intentions, consequences, and outcomes often extend beyond what is immediately visible. Trusting that there is a greater awareness at work allows you to release the burden of trying to control how justice unfolds. There is also a psychological freedom in letting go of personal revenge. When you stop trying to settle every score, you create space within yourself. That space can be used for healing, for reflection, and for growth. Holding on to anger may feel powerful in the moment, but over time it becomes heavy. It shapes how you see others, how you approach new relationships, and how you interpret situations that may not even be connected to the original harm. Releasing the need for revenge is not about excusing the behavior, it is about refusing to let it define your internal state. At the same time, trusting divine justice does not mean abandoning boundaries. You can still protect yourself, distance yourself from harmful people, and make decisions that prioritize your well-being. The difference is that these actions are no longer driven by a need to punish, but by a desire to maintain peace and integrity. You are not reacting to harm, you are responding to it with clarity. Psalm 64 speaks of a justice that unfolds in its own time, where hidden actions are brought into the light. This perspective invites patience, but not the kind that ignores reality. It is a patience rooted in Trust the understanding that not every wrong needs an immediate human response in order to be addressed. Some outcomes take shape beyond your direct involvement. Letting go of personal revenge can feel uncomfortable because it challenges the instinct to act. It requires you to sit with unresolved feelings without rushing to resolve them through external means. But in that stillness, something shifts. You begin to see that your peace does not depend on what happens to others, but on how you choose to carry what has happened to you. And in choosing trust over retaliation, you step into a different kind of strength, one that is not driven by reaction, but grounded in inner stability. Releasing fear and reclaiming inner peace is not a sudden act of courage. It is a gradual process of understanding how fear takes hold and how it quietly shapes your thoughts, your reactions, and your sense of safety. Fear, especially the kind connected to hidden harm or unseen opposition, does not always appear as panic. It can be subtle, showing up as hesitation, overthinking, constant alertness, or a quiet expectation that something negative might happen. In Psalm 64, the presence of secret enemies reflects this kind of environment, where the threat is not always visible, yet its emotional impact is real. Fear often begins as a protective response. It is the mind's way of trying to anticipate danger and keep you safe. But when fear is left unexamined, it can grow beyond its original purpose. Instead of guiding you, it begins to control you. You may find yourself avoiding certain situations, holding back from expressing yourself, or constantly scanning for signs of trouble. This state of hyper-awareness may feel like preparedness, but it often comes at the cost of peace. You are no longer simply living, you are bracing. Releasing fear does not mean eliminating it completely. Fear is a natural part of being human, and in some situations it serves an important function. The goal is not to silence fear, but to understand it. When fear arises, it is worth asking, what is this feeling trying to tell me? Is there an actual threat present, or is this a response shaped by past experiences or imagined outcomes? This kind of inquiry creates distance between you and the emotion, allowing you to observe it rather than be consumed by it. Inner peace, on the other hand, is not something you find externally. It is not dependent on everything around you being perfect or predictable. It is an internal state that develops when you learn to remain steady even when circumstances are uncertain. Reclaiming this peace requires you to shift your focus from trying to control everything outside of you to strengthening what exists within you. This includes your ability to stay present, to regulate your emotions, and to trust your capacity to handle whatever comes. One of the ways fear maintains its hold is through repetition of thought. The mind tends to replay scenarios, imagining different outcomes, often leaning toward the worst possibilities. These thoughts can feel convincing because they are persistent, but they are not always accurate. Recognizing this pattern is a key step in releasing fear. When you notice your mind moving in this direction, you can gently redirect your attention, not by forcing the thoughts away, but by grounding yourself in what is actually happening in the present moment. Psalm 64 offers a perspective that counters fear with trust, not blind trust, but a grounded assurance that what is hidden is not beyond understanding, and what is unjust is not beyond accountability. This perspective does not remove challenges, but it changes how you relate to them. Instead of feeling constantly threatened, you begin to feel supported, even in uncertainty. Reclaiming inner peace also involves letting go of the need to anticipate every possible outcome. There is a certain humility in accepting that not everything can be predicted or controlled. When you release this need, you free up mental and emotional space. You become less reactive, less overwhelmed by possibilities, and more connected to the present. Over time, as fear loses its intensity, peace begins to feel more natural. It is no longer something you have to chase or force. It becomes a steady presence, a quiet confidence that remains even when external conditions are not ideal. This does not mean that challenges disappear, but it means that they no longer define your internal state. You begin to move through life with a sense of balance, where awareness exists without anxiety, and caution exists without fear taking control. Walking in truth while hidden enemies are exposed requires a level of integrity that is not dependent on what others are doing behind the scenes. It is easy to live honestly when everything around you feels clear and fair. But the real test of character comes when there is uncertainty, when you suspect that not everything is as it seems, when motives are unclear, when actions around you do not align with words. In Psalm 64, there is a strong contrast between those who act in secrecy and the unfolding of truth that eventually reveals what was concealed. This contrast is not only about others being exposed, it is about how you choose to live in the meantime. Walking in truth begins with a commitment to authenticity. This means aligning your words, actions, and intentions as much as possible. When you are consistent in this way, you create a kind of internal stability. You are not constantly adjusting yourself based on external pressures or hidden dynamics. Instead, you operate from a place that is clear to you, even if it is not always clear to others. This clarity becomes especially important when you are surrounded by uncertainty, because it prevents you from being pulled into confusion or reaction. One of the challenges in this process is the temptation to respond to hidden negativity with similar behavior. When you sense that someone may not be acting in good faith, it can feel justified to become guarded, indirect, or even manipulative in return. But this approach often leads to a cycle where truth becomes diluted on all sides. Walking in truth requires you to resist that pull not by ignoring what is happening, but by choosing not to mirror it. You maintain your integrity not because others deserve it, but because it defines who you are. There is also a patience involved in this way of living. Truth does not always reveal itself immediately. Situations can remain unclear for long periods, and during that time it may feel as though dishonesty or hidden harm is going unnoticed. This is where trust becomes essential. Psalm 64 suggests that what is done in secret does not remain hidden indefinitely. Exposure in this sense is not something you force, it is something that unfolds. Your role is not to uncover every hidden detail, but to remain grounded while the process takes its course. Walking in truth also involves discernment. Being honest does not mean being naive or overly transparent in every situation. It means understanding when to speak, when to remain silent, and how to protect your boundaries without compromising your values. You can be truthful and still be wise about what you share and with whom you share it. This balance allows you to navigate complex environments without losing your sense of self. As hidden dynamics begin to surface over time, there is often a moment of clarity when what you sensed internally becomes visible externally. In these moments, it can be tempting to feel validated in a way that leads to pride or judgment. But walking in truth calls for humility even then. The exposure of others is not an invitation to elevate yourself, but a reminder of the importance of staying aligned with what is right. There is a quiet strength in this approach. It does not rely on control, force, or constant defense. Instead, it is rooted in consistency and awareness. You continue to act with integrity, even when it is not immediately rewarded or recognized. Over time, this consistency builds a foundation that cannot easily be shaken by hidden influences. In environments where not everything is visible, truth becomes both a guide and a grounding force. It keeps you oriented when circumstances are unclear, and it anchors you when emotions fluctuate. Rather than being defined by what is hidden, you are defined by how you choose to live in the presence of it.